Welcome, everybody, to our third Thursday lunch here on January the 18th. Our program Gaza Ceasefire Now will begin as soon as we hear Jim Johnson's reminders of how you can hear this program and eventually see this program after it's taken place. So, Jim, you have the stage here.
Okay, thanks you, Beverly. So welcome, folks. I'm Jim Johnson. It is my duty to explain to you that this third Thursday lunch event is being recorded and it will air on WFMP's Solution to Balance Radio. Today's program will feature mostly a Q&A session led by Schachaf Polokow and Ibrahim Imam. The Louisville Fellowship of Reconciliation's Pat Guy will moderate the Q&A session. We invite you to ask questions, but please state your name so that our radio audience knows who is speaking. Solution to Balance airs on WFMP 106.5 FM, Mondays at 5 p.m., Tuesdays at 8 a.m., and Wednesdays at 6 a.m. You can listen live stream if you visit us at forwardradio.org and click on Listen Live Now. The third Thursday lunch features Schachaf Polokow and Ibrahim Imam will air on Solution to Balance January 22nd, 23rd, and 24th. Today's presentation can also be found on the Louisville Fellowship of Reconciliation website, as well as Facebook Live. Beverly Marriott will introduce Pat Guy.
Okay, here goes. Our program today is going to be a different kind of program because of the demands of the assault on Gaza that continues today, because we have an obligation as librarians, as Americans, to know what's going on with this conflict, for which, as Americans, we share responsibility for the carnage in Israel and in Gaza. The latest chapter in the 76th year saga of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has been playing out on our screens, before our eyes, since October 7th, and it continues today because the United States has continued to follow its old playbook of supporting Israel politically, diplomatically, and militarily, and refuses to call for a ceasefire now, even though it has the power to stop this carnage in Gaza, which is killing not simply the Palestinians there, but hostages, citizens of other countries, Israeli soldiers, Hamas militants, and on and on. We are fortunate today and honored to have as our speakers and the people who are going to answer your questions two individuals whose lives have been shaped by the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, Ibrahim Imam and Schachaf Polokow. Our format is going to be different in that we hope that you have a lot of questions handy so that Pat Geyer, our moderator, can feed them to Ibrahim and Schachaf. So with that in mind, I want to hand the program over to Pat Geyer.
Thank you, Beverly. Thanks, everyone, for attending. We have a larger than usual audience. So as Beverly said, our format today is going to be question and answer. So Ibrahim and Schachaf will not be making a presentation. So be thinking about questions that you may want to ask them. I'd like to make just a few logistical comments. And those are, make sure you can find your mute button at the bottom of your screen. So, because David will be muting everybody except the speakers. And if you want to ask a question or make a comment, you need to know where that is. Also, if you can find your reaction button at the bottom of the screen and you click that, and you will see the raised hand. Now, if you can't figure that one out and you want to speak, raise your hand and motion to us wildly so we can see to be able to call you. Again, we really want your questions and we want your comments, but you can leave your rants and lectures for your family and friends. Okay, so keep your comments brief. Let's see. Also, if you don't want to speak, but you want to ask a question or make a comment, you can also put it in the chat, and we'll be watching the chat in order to get your question or comment out there. Ibrahim needs to leave a few minutes before 1 o'clock because he actually has a day job and he needs to teach a class at that time. Schachaf, if we're in the middle of a conversation, he's willing to stay a few minutes beyond that, but we'll be wrapping up right before 1 o'clock and Beverly can close the program. Okay, I think that's it for the logistics. And so if you have a question, you want to make a comment, please go to your reaction button, click on the raised hand as Barbara has just done. You can see her. And so Barbara, we'll call on you first.
I'd like to ask both Ibrahim and Schachaf how they feel how it could be resolved with the land between the Palestinians and Israel. Thought we'd start off with something hard.
Something very hard.
But I know
Schachaf,
Ibrahim's a Christian Palestinian and Schachaf is a Jewish Israeli man, now American. And I, as a Jewish person, I'm very interested in their answers. Thank you.
I'll let Schachaf start, and he has more insight on what goes on inside the Israeli society than I do. So he might start with that, and then we'll take it from there. Go for it, Schachaf.
I think thanks for the question. I think it's what's always been a complicated question. Quite honestly, I think a lot of what we focus now is saving Palestinian lives mostly and other victims, and ceasefire is what's the only thing I can think about because there is a genocide happening. And the hope is, and this is with a big asterisk, is this tragedy and horrifying genocide which forced the failed global world to force Israel to accept Palestinian existence. I don't know, and I don't expect the Palestinians to want to live in a one-state solution with Israelis after that. I'm a one-state person for many years out of ideological that any two nation states will just amplify hate and cannot bring justice. To say that I think we can have one state or two states or no state, which is also becoming it's really hard to imagine these days what is the solution. The solution is a long-term after this, but it has to come from international pressure Israelis, because regardless to Hamas choices and resistance, Israel is the one who shapes the reality in the last 76 years with the support of the world. So it's not a moral stand of what's happening now. It's to understand the reality, and the reality is, especially with a government now that it's openly in their statement says that one of the main goals is expand the Judification and Jewish settlements all around historic Israel, whatever that means for them. Then thinking of what Israel can do inside is almost useless. There is a small and very powerful resistance to the war by Israelis and Palestinians or opposition, but they are such minority. And I know that it's hard to imagine at this point what will be a solution, but we need to have some conversation about hope. The one thing I learned from Jewish history, I think about my grandmother was in Moldova, which was, now it's Moldova, used to be Ukraine, then the German came, and Romania, been a lot of things in the 20th century. But all her village, and I didn't know it till 2 years ago, in one night, 1,000 people were killed. And I'm talking with you today. So even through genocide, there is hope for survivors. And maybe the understanding is that Israel wasn't the solution for hope the way it's set up. So without Jewish safety, which is divested and not related to Zionism anyway, we'll never reach any solution. But if you want a quick answer, a one-state solution, everybody between the river and the sea live in justice, peace, and respect to each other. But it is really utopian. That's not like, oh, we can do it tomorrow.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree, 100% about, what's going on inside the Israeli society and, the prospects for what type of solution we expect. The only problem I see is that there is a bigger power that actually seems to be a major player in that conflict, and that actually is the United States government. One of the things that we do not really know is, and we're not quite sure, is what does the United States envision for that region? I talked about this before, and there seem to be three very important passages that seem to control our policy in that part of the world. And again, the first one is the Straits of Hormuz, that actually controls the entrance to the Gulf. The Arabs want to call it the Arabian Gulf, the Iranians want to call it the Persian Gulf, but that's a very, very important passage for all the oil that goes to the world comes from that. Then there are the two link points that actually link basically the Indian Ocean to the Mediterranean, to the Pacific, to the Atlantic Ocean, and that's basically Bab el-Mandab, which we actually are now hearing more about. 30 years ago when I talked about it, nobody knew where it was. But now everybody knows that actually is controlling the bottom entrance of the Red Sea. And then there is the Suez Canal. And the United States seems to have a very, different plan for that region than what we are actually envisioning. That region has changed drastically very recently. We know now the Arab Emirates and Bahrain and all those governments actually have changed their attitude under the pressure of the US government by basically creating lackey regimes in there. One of them all of a sudden decided to become a king in Bahrain, and then there is the Zayed family in the Arab Emirates. These people basically started, and they are, under the pressure of the Americans, because America has actually a big naval base in Bahrain, and it has a command center in Qatar and in the Arab Emirates. They actually basically, through the Abrahamic Accord, that, whatever that means, what Trump came up with, actually did, under that pressure, they normalized relations with the state of Israel. The country that seems to be still resistant to normalization of relations with the state of Israel is actually Saudi Arabia with Mohammed bin Salman. But the reality is that Mohammed bin Salman is not opposed to normalizing relations with Israel. Actually, tacitly, this actually has been taking place. The only thing is Saudi Arabia cannot go openly and normalize relations with the United States. And they are putting pressure on the American government to put pressure on Israel to give something to the Palestinians so that we can actually come up with a openly and normalize relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia, which is something that the US government wants and Israel wants, but Israel is not willing because of the pressure of the right wing, which seems to be controlling the government of Israel, is not willing to give Palestinians anything. And as Schachaf said, they want to Yahudize the whole entire region. And this is the government that actually is controlling the actions of Israel. And that put a tremendous pressure on Palestinians. And Palestinians had to make it very clear that they are not in agreement with what's going on, and they don't want the Arab nations to determine their future. That was one of the main reasons, actually, for the October 7th, we call the war between Hamas and Israel. And this is a misnomer. It is not a war between Hamas and Israel. It's actually a war that Israel has actually, that actually has started because Hamas, did something that, quote unquote, they were not supposed to. They are not supposed to resist. They are not supposed to cross their borders, and they are not supposed to attack any Israelis. And Hamas actually did that. And that actually endangered that whole situation for those governments that I just talked about. In addition to Hamas, what Hamas did, there was a great danger that Iran would, with the supporting Hezbollah, the forces in Syria and the Houthis in Yemen. That's probably, everybody knows that this is their source of support. They were afraid that this is gonna get to be way too big that the United States cannot control. And that's why in 2 days after October 7th, the US fleet sent its aircraft carriers and sent a few ships to the Mediterranean, and Macron flew to Lebanon and to that region so that to convince the Lebanese government that it is not in their interest to let Hezbollah really attack the state of Israel. Because that would expand things, and the US will end up being forced to enter another war. And at this time, the United States is not capable of, starting a full-scale war in that region. We're already very occupied in Ukraine. And therefore, and then what the surprising thing that happened is Hamas turned out to be a whole lot stronger than Israel anticipated and the United States anticipated. And what they thought probably is something that they can finish in 3 weeks ended up taking 100, and I lost count now, I think we are 105 days. And that changed the whole equation over there. Finally, right now, Blinken is trying to convince the Israeli government that this approach and this war is not going to lead to what Israel wanted to, accomplish, which is basically, in a sense, evicting Gaza and finishing Hamas. This is the whole idea. And Blinken told Netanyahu recently that, a military solution, getting rid of Hamas, is not going to happen. And that was a big surprise for the world. And that changed things drastically on ground. So now what happened is we had 103 days war. We now realize that the Palestinian resistance is a lot stronger than we anticipated it to be in Gaza. And we got all these skirmishes in the West Bank, and Israel's basically realizing that, again, its existence is still in jeopardy. And it's creating certain divisions within the Israeli society that Schachaf is actually probably aware of, which is people now are beginning to refuse more to go fight in Gaza and Palestinian areas. And Israel as a society now realizing that there is a price that actually they are paying for wars like this. It's not the old time where you go in after 2 weeks, you reach Gaza City and you do whatever you want and pull back. And we don't exactly know the losses that they actually have, suffered. And we don't know exactly how much Hamas as a force have actually suffered. But what we really see right now is 25,000 Palestinians, the majority of them are actually children, were actually killed under that. Palestinians themselves are aware that this is a price that they have to pay for their own liberation and for their own freedom. But that's a huge price that's actually being paid by that nation. And the United States now is in a position where it really is panicking and it doesn't know what to do. They still want to control that part of the world. And they realize that what Israel is doing actually is backfiring, and they are not able to redraw the map of the Middle East as they actually plan to do. And again, the Palestinians are a stumbling block for them. The United States probably still feels bad for the fact that they were not part of Sykes-Picot Treaty. And they don't like what the French and they want to control. We've seen this before. We've seen them when they reached out to Saudi Arabia because they didn't like the fact that the British were in control of the Persian oil. And this is, again, a competition between all colonial forces to occupy that part of the world. And that complicates the situation for the Palestinians and the Israelis alike. The reality of it is we both are pawns in the hands of a bigger power that actually is trying to achieve something that nobody really knows what it exactly is. And I know this is not optimistic. I do not see, Schachaf probably is more aware of this than I am. If Israel is to establish or to go for what they call a two-state solution, that is, that would mean there will be a civil war inside Israel. That means that the Israeli army will be in charge of evicting settlers from the West Bank, and if they ever go back to Gaza, and the Israeli army cannot do that, and that the settlers are not going to let them do that, and that basically will basically create a civil war inside the Israeli society. So the two-state solution is completely out. With the losses and the injuries that have taken place, the Israelis are not going to look fondly upon Arabs. They never did. And the Arabs have already had so many wounds, and they're not going to look fondly at Israelis. And to have a binational state now is almost impossible. So what's going to happen is, I think ultimately, somebody is going to get tired of that situation and leave that situation. And if they succeed in evicting Palestinians, we'll continue to suffer. And so if some Israelis leave on their own and the society internally changes, and we're willing to have a binational state, not an apartheid state, who knows? That might happen, but that's not going to happen in my lifetime, and it's not an optimistic picture. But the big stumbling block, if the United States wanted to impose a solution there, they would have a long time ago. They did not do it. In 1973, Israel almost lost the Yom Kippur War. And it was the United States that bailed them out. And if you look at what's happening right now, the United States is bailing them out. And the United States now is in a tough position because they can't fight all these wars together. Now the pressure is on the German government. Now the German government being a member of the NATO and the British being a member of, an ally of the United States are the ones that are actually supplying Israel with what it needs. If those countries do not supply Israel with the armaments that they need, that war would have been over a long time ago. Barbara, I know this is not a short answer that you expected, but this is a reality. This is what's really going on the ground.
Okay, Ibrahim. Schachaf, before we go to the next question, and Shauna, I see that you've raised your hand, so I'll get to you, I promise. Schachaf, any comments on what Ibrahim just said?
Two comments. I think there are a few things what Ibrahim said about Israeli society. I wouldn't say there will be a civil war that quickly. They're all unified for a war, for a genocide. So a lot of outsiders think there is a bigger fraction inside than it actually is. Zionism know through fear how to unite people. So the Israeli, but it's another kind of theoretical, until we get to the point where there might be a two-state solution. And yeah, that's the only thing I had in mind. It was the answer delved to other areas of the history of the region that we can have a whole different meeting just about that. So, yeah.
Thank you. Shauna, where'd you go? There you are.
Hi. First of all, I want to thank you all for making this space. Thank you, Ibrahim. Thank you, Schachaf, for taking this time to educate us. I mean, we need to see more spaces like this in America, specifically for Americans. I am a Kentucky resident. I am a licensed clinical social worker, and I hope that no one minds me using this space to take the opportunity to say this, but I'm actually running for Congress for the U.S. House of Representatives in the 6th District of Kentucky. I am a pro-ceasefire, anti-war candidate. I'm going to stop my video so you can see my logo. Oops, you can't. But again, I appreciate the space. I hope no one minds me taking the time to say this. I would ask anyone who is in the 6th District of Kentucky to please consider voting for me. I'm running to unseat Andy Barr, who is a pro-war AIPAC-backed candidate. I am not a career politician. I've never ran for office. I am a regular person, but I am doing a good job, and I have a lot of support for my campaign. If anyone has any questions for me or would like to support me in any way, I would appreciate that.
Thank you, Sean. Okay. Anybody else? Yes, Jeff.
Hi, I'm sorry I was late getting in here. I'm a candidate for Congress 2 in the 3rd District, Louisville, Jefferson County, against Morgan McGarvey, Democrat. I'm running in the primary. I'm a Democrat too. I think perhaps Ibrahim Imam's presentation was a little too pessimistic. The events in the world and in Southwest Asia are changing extremely rapidly. Israel has revealed itself as a country willing to commit genocide against the Palestinian people. South Africa has taken them to the World Court. I'm sorry, the International Court of Justice.
Justice.
And sorry, I should have disconnected my phone. Sorry about
Okay.
that. And I think that Israel is the current Zionist government in Israel is going to fall quite soon. And if that happens, then a number of other possibilities open up, mainly the one state and the two-state solution, both are on the table right away. You know, so I think what needs to happen is an international peace conference where Israel is on one side of the table and the rest of the world is on the other. US and NATO countries should be excluded. And the world needs to tell Israel, you need to choose one state or two-state solution.
Okay,
And,
Jeff, thank
nothing
you.
else is going to be acceptable. Thank you.
Thank you for your statement. Now, let's try to get back to some questions while we have these two speakers available to us. Actually, Schachaf, I have a question.
I think there is a person who unmuted himself,
Oh.
John, who wanted to ask something.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Who's this?
Also Shona on the chat, I think mentioned.
John, let me take you and then Barbara and Shauna. Did you have another question?
What?
Okay.
Yeah, John, if you want to go.
I have so many questions and I have so much to learn. But I just don't want to take too much of everyone's time. I know it's valuable, especially Schachaf's, especially Ibrahim's. But
Okay.
I just have some questions about the
Okay, well, hang on. Let me go to John and then Barbara, and then if nobody else has raised their hands, we'll come back to you.
Okay, sounds great.
Okay, John.
Yeah, I wanted to ask both of you about the implications to international law. After World War II, the world came together and decided there were some things that we needed to figure out a way to stop because technology was empowering us to horrific levels of atrocity. And so the Geneva Conventions, et cetera. Israel seems to have agreed that it is subject to the Genocide Convention and to the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice. But I am not optimistic that Israel will comply if the court finds it guilty of genocide and insists, for example, that there be a sufficient ceasefire to allow food and basic supplies in. And so my concern and my question is, there's been some rhetoric out there. Is it too extreme to say this could be, in effect, the death of that consensus after World War II and the death of the international law movement?
Thank you, John. Ibrahim or Schachaf, who would like to go first?
I can go first if it's okay.
Sure.
I think the idea of the international law was always a great utopian idea. Since the Second World War, many countries violated the laws and never been accountable, with the US being number one, probably. We as humanity failed with 2 recognized genocides since 45, the Rwandan and the Balkan in Bosnia. We don't know how to have interventions because of outsider conflicts. The so-called objective or observer powers are not really knowing what to do. And saying all of that, I actually think the South African move is the most important stuff that happened. It's put Israel in a position that will publicly need to acknowledge what they're doing. So even if they're not found guilty for genocide, sorry, the chat popped up for me. The other thing I want to say is there's a second part to it that the South African are planning today, and I read in South African news that South African law is working with lawyers in the US and the UK to found the US and the UK accomplices to genocide for Israel. So if Israel doesn't recognize, there are laws in the UK and the US that we can. But one of the things I said for years in the movement, which I don't know how you do that, a lot of people like myself, I'm just recently a dual citizenship with Americans, but a lot of young Americans go to volunteer in the Israeli army for 1.5 years. If we had a legal tool to say, you're participating in a war crime, when you come back, we're taking you for court, regardless of the morality of that. You can't be going to the West Bank and even standing at checkpoint without being accountable. My wife, the first time she came to Palestine and Israel in 2008, she ended up in Hebron, and it's the first time she saw a military checkpoint where Hebron is the most segregated apartheid case in the whole of the West Bank. And the soldiers there was American, and they found out, to her horrors, that both of them originally from Seattle. And she's not Jewish, so for her to see an American citizen going and participating, so it's not just arms that's providing that, it's a whole other system that needs not only from outreach, and we see it in younger Jewish generation that's changing and less supportive of Israel, but actually take accountable for these people that are going there and participating. If you are American army and you're now sending arms, then, or you are participating in this war, you need to legally abide by American laws. There is the high law, there is other ways, and back originally to the question, I'm not a big, I don't have big faith in international law and institutes because I think they're really important, but they failed. Like, they didn't stop the war in Iraq, which was illegally according to international courts. There was no even international support. So I think there need to be a whole UN convention that reconfigure all international relationships and morality and go back to what 45 meant to be and revisit that and rethinking how can we actually have powerful institutions. But yeah, that's my answer. Maybe Ibrahim want to add.
No, I mean, I'm in full agreement. The United States and England and in Israel too have never really abided by the international law. We know from since 1967 openly, the US government does recognize that Israel has actually, Jimmy Carter, Barack Obama, all these people have recognized that and realized that Israel has broken every item in the Geneva Convention. They've moved their people into occupied land. They did not provide security for the occupied. They didn't, I mean, they broke every part of the Geneva Convention. Israel never showed any respect for international law. what South African government did and what they did was actually an impeccable, great, courageous move that actually basically reinforced what we have known all along, that Israel has no respect for international law. The implications of all these judges, I don't know how many, I think 12 or so, if they find Israel guilty of genocide, that is going to have a great implication on every government that actually has supplied and was part of this genocide. And the United States is very, very, complicit in this. We all know that. And so is Germany, if Germany decides that they want to send them bombs. So that will complicate things for everybody. And it might, in a sense, discourage some people if the United States end up having to abide by this, like Schachaf said, people from New York that will not be able to go carry arm and fight on Israeli checkpoints and stuff like that. So, but the question becomes: is the world, is the United States, and is Israel willing to respect international law? And the sad reality is they're going to ignore it. They're going to ignore it.
Let's also have a quick follow-up. Just remember that it can take 15 years. Like the last case that actually convicted people took 14 years. So the court is very slow. They can have interjections and suggestions to the international,
exactly,
which are very important, but actually convicting of genocide can take way longer.
Yep.
So that's really important to remember.
Yep.
Okay, let me call on Wallace. You've had your hand up for a while.
Thank you. I was a little bit late, so if this is a stupid question, I apologize. But my question is, so we've heard basically about how dire and awful the situation is, and my question is, are there things that us ordinary run-of-the-mill citizens in Louisville can try to do to help mitigate the situation at all?
I don't think that the U.S. government has the will or the desire to try to change what's happening right now. And the reason this lasted this long is actually because this is something that the United States desire to have happen. We are as a U.S. government as complicit and as guilty of everything that's happening there. And unfortunately, the Netanyahu government is basically serving exactly what Joe Biden wants. When somebody says, if Israel didn't exist, I would create it, that actually will give you an idea about what are his intention or his government's intention in that part of the world. And I don't think that it's really his. When I say his, I don't mean him personally, but I really mean his government, because nobody really knows what he thinks himself internally. But I think this is the direction the U.S. government is going into. And this is not new. This has been going on for years. So, yeah, unfortunately, they do not have the will nor the desire.
I think there are a few elements that are really important for organizing now. I will try to send to the organizer links of actually the smaller picture, which is direct support to Palestinians in Gaza. There are different ways to doing fundraisers. They're saying in Jewish world, like if you save one person, you save the whole world. One soul is the whole world, and sometimes that's what brings us hope. We don't know the end game, we don't know the end, but we know that we can save people. We need to make a pressure of Americans. Representative, calls a representative, tell him why Israel killed 117 journalists. My friend, I'm part of a photography collective, and we have a photographer in Gaza. One of the things I did a lot since the war started to edit photos and publish them through my collective. But he tried to leave, and there's no way out. It's not like any other war that you've seen. There's no border. Regardless of the politics of Ukraine, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, people can run away in most of the cases there. There is a direction where you can, in this case, you can't run away. it's a siege of, this is why it's can very easily be argued as a genocide. The fact that you can't run away. But there is ways out, there are lists, and these lists need to be approved by different people. So for example, if you had a relative or friend and you invite him to the US, you need to pressure your Congress representative to approve it. You need to find a way to say, how come there's no pieces about journalists being directly killed? Every journalist who tried to cover in some of the areas is Palestinian is under threat. Last week, my friend was in a press convoy and the car in front of him was bombed, and 2 Al Jazeera journalists were killed. And he was in the car behind it, and he tell us, people in the refugee, he lives in tents, plastic-made tents. People in the camp don't want to live near journalists. So there's other issues, like tech-specific issues. We know we don't want arms to go anywhere. So that's a kind of an easy target. Fight, support all the initiative you see to do that, stop arming the US. Another thing that it's really important beyond humanitarian support for people there is we need to be compassionate. We're seeing a wave of Islamophobic, anti-Palestinian reality that is not seen since 9/11. It's bringing hate on both sides. I'm not saying to equate what there's a rise of anti-Israeli sentiment that some people wrongfully call anti-Semitic, but it's still, there is anti-Semitism, mostly by white supremacy. But we need to make safe spaces for people. You need to ask your friends who are Palestinians, or even Jewish or Israeli, even if you disagree with them, like, how are you doing? You know, because we lost humanity over there, it doesn't mean we need to give up on it here, because without that, we will be, that's where we lose the hope. But it's like the laws already were anti-Palestinians before. The boycott, divestment movement was outlawed state after state. If you are saying from the river to the sea now, for some reason, suddenly it's translated to a genocide of Israelis and Jews, which is, you need to educate people. You need to be able, like, I don't have the capacity, as I told the organizer ahead of time, to be in arguments and debates with people these days, because I'm dealing with people on the ground. I'm dealing with trying to get my friend and his family from Gaza. So it's like, this is more important for me than public debate. But it doesn't mean I don't think it's important. And the other thing, there's a lot of small actions that will lead to a bigger hope. And that's known in history of social movements. We many times think about apartheid ending in 1990 towards 94, but we don't think about for example, that actually the ANC led one people, one vote, and the black and white co-resistance to apartheid led to a lifelong friendships and thought that leads us today. Civil rights movement is a great, like, I don't say that Afro-American reality in the US is liberation and freedom, but we can still remember that less than 70 years ago that it was much worse. And it's hard to think about it in the middle of a genocide, in the middle of a war. But it's important for us as individuals to try to engage from the smaller scale to the bigger scale of this. What can we change? So yes, there are links to how to support kids in Gaza. There are links to sign and letters and send it to your congressperson. And there are small demos that you can join. But I really think that's kind of also helping us to maintain our own energies.
Thank you, Schachaf. Farah, I want to just check in with you. You put some things in the chat. Do you want to say anything?
No, just my question, and I don't want to, if we have other focused questions, I'm glad, but I just was asking about the logic of escalation and kind of what's going on regionally more. Like I said in the chat that I'm worried about this escalation and about going to war with Iran. And I know it's a really it's a really big thing would be, it might not happen, but I'm just wondering if you could say more about that. And just that, as Carla also said, we do have a local Louisville ceasefire coalition that we've been working very hard in lots of different ways, and a number of you are part of that already. So please get in touch with us if you want to be a part of organizing some of the stuff that's coming up against the war in Gaza, the genocide in Gaza. Thanks.
Farah, how do people get in touch with you if they want to be part of that?
Yeah, I put my number in the chat. So it's 502-530-3030, easy enough to remember. So please just call me or text me if you want to get involved.
Great, thank you. Kate Cunningham, if you're still on, I want to check in with you because you put a number of things in the chat as well. Do you want to say anything? Okay, we may have lost Kate.
No, I'm here, but no, I have no other question. I just put in a note to Schachaf that I appreciate his voice of reason and his urging us to keep our humanity here. Thank you.
I can answer Farah's question about de-escalation. One is already to say that we are against a war in Iran, because as genocide complicit Biden is, if Trump is winning, all his campaign going to be war in Iran. And if Biden is winning, maybe also his campaign going to be war in Iran. So whatever president comes, that might be the next step. There's a lot, and really hard for people in the US to follow because most Americans only read English. There's a lot of other voices in the Middle East and that are talking about nonviolent, community-based organizing. In every country you think that something horrible happening, there are less military, there are feminist movements everywhere, there are anti-authoritarian movements, and we need to learn from them about the language of anti-war, because they are the people that are affected in the end. I can say that sadly for me, regardless to Hamas choices, and I feel it as an almost personal failure, I was involved with the Popular Committee in Palestine against the war and occupation and colonization for years, and that is and was a non-violent movement. And I said not because I say fail, not because I think the choice was failure, it's because we didn't succeed to convince the world that there is non-violent movement that calling for equality and justice.
Right.
And it's led Palestinians, and not all Palestinians, led Palestinians in Gaza with Hamas leadership to choose that military resistance. And I also said again, not because of what I think is right or wrong of the choices, because 25,000 Palestinian dead is emotionally horrifying. And we could have prevented it. And I think a lot of us in the movement need to rethink what's the next steps. But that's not about, again, supporting what kind of resistance, just like how do we help Palestinians to rebuild and heal. And hopefully from that, there will be also peace with Israelis. But and I'm saying that, and I have family in Israel and friends. So it's not that I'm ignoring what's happening there on their side. But
no, go ahead. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm done.
Okay. I'm looking at the chat and I see something that Kate has written, and I really would like to address this point. And what she has says, I have read that Netanyahu supported Hamas for years in order to undermine Palestinian Authority and weaken Palestinian leadership. This is a misconception about really what happens inside the Palestinian society. And sometimes this really is repeated often to cast shadow on the legitimacy of whatever, liberation movement that actually exists in Palestine. The Palestinian society has always felt and suffered the occupation and the displacement. And it is their natural right to coalesce around movements that actually will call for their liberation and would help them as an occupied society in managing their daily and their regular affairs. The Hamas movement is not something that Israel has planted or, as we say, allowed to happen. the Hamas is basically an ideology that believes in the liberation of the Palestinian society. They happen to be built on an Islamic ideology. And the people in Gaza realize, and they, the Palestinian Authority existed basically for a long time after Oslo. And it's basically the Palestinian Liberation Organization, PLO, which actually was established against the will of Israel, of course. It was established as a liberation movement in diaspora. PLO started in Kuwait. And it became the Palestinian resistance against the Israeli occupation and towards the liberation of the 1948. And after Oslo, the Palestinian Authority became recognized as a representative of the Palestinian people. Unfortunately, the Palestinian Authority was not able to satisfy, they got corrupt, whatever has happened to them. Yes, as a political movement, as every political movement, it stands to be corrupt at some point in its career, in its life. And what happened is that the people in Gaza were not satisfied with what the PLO was actually doing. They had different ideologies, and they are the one who selected Hamas as their representative. There were elections, and Hamas won those elections. And of course, Israel and the Palestinian Authority were not happy about that, and they tried a coup-like attempt using Mahmoud Dahlan to get rid of the Hamas elected officials as representatives of the Palestinian people. So to say that Netanyahu supported Hamas, or to say that Hamas was created by the state of Israel and things like that, really is misrepresentation of what happens inside the Palestinian society. The Palestinian society is very well aware of the fact that it is under occupation, and it is very well aware of the fact that it has the right to resist. And they coalesce around different ideologies. There was the Popular Front, which was a socialist movement. There was Habash, who was, in a sense, was a communist Christian Palestinian. So the Palestinian society is like any other society, will coalesce around movements that actually will satisfy their needs and their whatever they feel is fighting for their cause. And that's a problem now for the United States. Because many, many years ago, people refused to recognize PLO as a representative of the Palestinians, and they shunned it. And they won't even talk to it. But they were forced to. And they took them to Oslo and deceived them over there. And now the Palestinian people have coalesced around another movement that actually proved that it can actually fight for them. And now Israel and the United States do not know how are they going to deal with Hamas. They cannot, win a military victory. It is proved that they cannot do it. They had 103 days and they could not do it. They are going to now resort to assassinations. They've already assassinated one of their leadership, and they're going to try to assassinate other leaders, but that's not going to kill the movement. And then ultimately, they're going to have to realize that they have to sit at the table and either continue to fight or sit at the table and come up with at least a temporary solution to how to manage and deal with Gaza. And transferring 2.5 million people is not going to happen. Ben Gvir is not going to get his wish. I don't mean to dwell on this. I have to leave in about 3 or 4 minutes, but I'm going to be quiet and let somebody ask a question.
Okay, thanks, Ibrahim. John?
Yeah, I have the impression that, as you say, looking at the
John, you're
Palestinian
breaking up.
community. Oh, is this better? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
I apologize. I have a very bad connection today. But my impression is that inside of the Palestinian community, as you say, Hamas is a resistance movement. It's the idea of resistance, including by force, to an occupation. I think Netanyahu has painted himself perhaps into a corner inside of Israeli community by bragging that he was responsible for cultivating Hamas as a way to keep the Palestinians' voices split, and saying at various points, it's been reported, if you want to oppose one state, or if you want to oppose a two-state solution, forgive me, help me to support Hamas. Now, whether he actually did anything in that regard isn't to be confused at all with the movement inside of Palestine among the people. That's my interpretation, but I'd love to be corrected.
No, that's, I mean, that's true, and this, unfortunately, Netanyahu painted himself in a corner again by saying that the military goal was to actually get rid of Hamas, and now they are scaling down, and they're saying that their war objectives have been reached, and they are going to start pulling some of their battalions out of there, and they're trying to figure out a way to say, to save face, basically, and say we have achieved a victory, and the only thing that they've achieved is they've murdered 25,000 Palestinians, but they have not achieved any political or military, victory. And as a matter of fact, Hamas is going to come out of this stronger as an ideology and a resistance movement than it ever was, not only in Palestine but throughout the Arab world.
Ibrahim, I know that you need to leave.
Right.
So let me thank you for being here and for your unrelenting witness in support of your people.
I thank you all. Schachaf, thank you very much. We'll continue this discussion separately at some time, and my best to everyone, and I hope we get to stop this genocide as soon as possible. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ibrahim.
Schachaf, I'm wondering, do you have anything you want to say to John's comments or anything else? We have just a few minutes before we wrap up.
Just the one thing I want to emphasize, the alternative to Netanyahu are not necessarily better. They're not suddenly will be a pro-Palestinian two-state people. These are people that also had a genocidal discourse from the beginning of the war. They're just going to operate it differently. As a anti-Zionist Jew, and whatever Israeli, grew up in Israel and Israeli, I have no faith in any Jewish-led government because it's stand on the ground of a settler colonial state of mind, which means that they need to take control on everything and the inhabitants of the land. So regardless of what Netanyahu did or not with Hamas, the division between Gaza and the West Bank was done by different governments. It was done before. Actually, it's already started in the beginning of the 90s with checkpoints and permits that Gazans couldn't go out. It's not just a siege that started after Hamas won the elections. I think it's and it's already acknowledged in a lot of the Israeli media that Hamas is not going to disappear. Regardless if we see it as successful Hamas or not, because I don't consider 25,000 dead people a success. They definitely show that they're not there to disappear. And so the next government might come with more friendly faces that Americans will like and Europeans will like, and can fly back to Saudi Arabia to have meetings and Bahrain and whatnot. But it doesn't mean they're not still based of mostly men who came from military establishment, because that's what Israel governments are, regardless to which party you are. So it's a masculine, militaristic state of mind. And their accomplices. I think it's important that Netanyahu would leave, mostly because there is an understanding that the war in Gaza need to other downsides or end in Israel, because they know so many people say there is no goals at the moment. And there is a Vietnam moment, or what Israel calls the Lebanon moment, where you just you're sinking in a mud, you know, there's nothing else you can get, but you're just fighting for the sake of fighting an ego. And that's an important thing, that if we can at least stop this heavy bombardment and heavy killing of Palestinians, we can support that without believing the Israeli or the American government. But only pressure will make them do that. And I think they start feeling it. And I don't know what it means in terms of what's going to happen next, but if going to what I kind of repeated again, what I would look at is not in government. It's the people that organize on the ground. There is, in Israel, Palestine, there is standing together, is a decent movement of Palestinians and Israelis that's working on mobilizing people together. Since the beginning of the war, the membership grew dramatically through solidarity actions. And in the US, if you are looking for radical Jewish voices, you have Jewish Voice for Peace, you have If Not Now, and there's a new movement that you can find on Instagram, which I'm kind of related to, of anti-Zionist Israelis called Shoresh. So there are voices out there. Obviously, listen to your Palestinian friends and Palestinian leadership and movements that you follow already, if you didn't. But just to say there is more voices that you can listen to. And I can send the names to the organizers to share later, so it's not disappearing in the chat or anything like that. But it's knowing and seeing faces here. I assume that most of you know that social justice and social movement is a long run, and for Palestinians, it's one of the longest we know now, and it's a marathon or ultra marathon. But it's a turning point, and I want to warn people, or to make people aware, that everything we fought till October 7th changed dramatically. This is a bigger trauma for Palestinians than 48 in many ways. And it's changed Israeli society probably the way 9/11 changed, and we push them to the right. So we need to have different conversations based on our past, but we start to think to people who have the capacity, what else we can see as a better future to everybody. And it's really, it's a seismic change. It's a seismic change that sadly can lead to a regional war, because we see all the different parties that chose violence recently, or it can also be a whole different rethinking and having the Palestinian issue in the center of global discussion that was abandoned for more than 10 years now. Nobody talk about Palestine for so long now. So we have an opportunity for this tragedy to focus on justice for Palestinian and liberation for Palestinian. And we can do that without falling into arguments about solutions. And this is why I tend not to talk about solutions, because saving our friends in Gaza or buying food to Palestinians in the South Mount of Hebron is more important for me to spend an hour arguing with anybody inside or outside the movement about what's the solution. The same way that here, I'm not gonna, I think it's more important for me to go and buy food for unsheltered or unhomed people. But that's my choice. That's the way I'm more of a direct action, direct relationship with people person. And these things exist. And it's not one or the other. If what you choose is to run for Congress and be in the political arena, that's great. I applaud you for that. People should support you, bringing new discourse into there. In the same time, we also need to help people that can immediately be saved on different political front. But I would offer something. I don't know if people have questions here before we finalize. I'm happy to answer a couple more questions. Or
okay, Schachaf, can we call? We're just going to take one more question because we are somewhat over time. Kate, you had your hand up for a while.
Sorry, I meant a thumbs up.
Okay.
Excellent, excellent. I appreciate Shakov's reasoned.
Okay,
Thank you.
very good. Schachaf, last word. You have the last word.
Yeah, I think for a lot of us, this moment is overwhelming. It's not, it's the first genocide to go live on TV and social media. Previous war crimes weren't so direct to us. A lot of people being exposed to horrors that they never thought they would be seen in such. So, hold yourself together and support each other, but also maybe take a moment a day and think, maybe look at some stories of these people. We need to remember the people we lost. I do it for Israelis that are lost, mostly in October 7th, and also for obviously Palestinians. And we have to grieve what we lost, so that we can celebrate whoever survived and live after this and have power. And it's okay if you just choose to grieve the one side, but remember that this is not just numbers. These are people. This is we have family. We have friends that have families there. We have friends over there, and try to think how you hold some kind of memorial aspects with other people around you, and not just the horror and paralyzation, but actually remember, and try to grieve together so we can move to whatever next steps are, and hopefully some of it will have hope. Maybe we'll do another one in 3 months and I'll give you more hopeful conversation, but I can't promise any of that.
Okay. Schachaf, thank you so much. We are really deeply grateful, not just for what you said today, but for the way you hold this issue deeply within you and remain dedicated to peace and security for both peoples in the region. Beverly, back to you.
Beverly, you need to unmute yourself.
Am I unmuted now? Good.
Yes.
Everett Hoffman is my technical helpmate here. So thank you, Everett. My heartfelt thanks to Ibrahim and Schachaf for coming to us. They are peacemakers. They are speaking for both sides of two traumatized peoples to us, and we are fortunate that we have their wisdom and their insights. If you want to stay, my advice to our wonderful large audience is that you stay up to date with this situation. You can go to the website aljazeera.com, the English version, and follow it there. If haaretz.com is something that you can pay for to be able to watch, those are two sources that will get you beyond the US media coverage in a more realistic way. You can continue to call on your elected representatives for a ceasefire now, a Gaza ceasefire now. You cannot call them too often. Our Senators McConnell and Rand Paul and our Congressman Marvin McGarvey are, here we go. Gaza ceasefire now, Fellowship of Reconciliation. And keep expressing your opinion and support of both the Palestinians and the Israelis in calling for a ceasefire now as a first start to getting a better handle on this situation and making your opinions known. Now, as to our next program, our third Thursday lunch on February 15th, please mark your calendars. February is Black History Month, and so our program and our speaker is going to focus on Black History Month, and I hope you'll be joining us.